Well, well, I will say that I've come on here again, and as you know, we've been through the nativity pieces with Mary, Joseph, and the angels, and I decided, as I have been talking about, that I have already cut out the little blanks for the cribs and drawn out the lines on them so that they can be sewn. These little lines you see for the legs, those are just sawn along and we kind of carve underneath them as we go. But I'm going to get started here just showing you how I saw the lines in from under the crib to make the legs and how I'll carve along with the knife after that comes out. But here is where I'm going to get started now. Um, so I'm going to saw these lines out right here. Then we're going to get around to doing a video where I'm going to demonstrate how I carve them. Well, now there's these little lines we cut here to make the sides where we carve out the legs, and I've already kind of done it on this one too, kind of made the other lines from the other side where we also carve the inside of the legs to make it like this. And I forgot to stop to tell you that or demonstrate, but this is what we're going to do next on the other one. We're going to show how we do that. Now I have finally cut those lines right here and am thinking for the moment we can finally take the goggles off, take the mask off, perhaps move the tablet over here where we are going to do the carving part, and I've got the pieces over here. Of course, we're going to kind of reposition the thing so you can kind of see where I am carving at. And I will say there's going to be a little difficulty here because I've never carved a crib on a camera before. So for this time, I will be looking at these instructions in the book to make sure I am following along with them while I make this little carving here. And there's just some things we're going to look into here. From what I see here, there's a certain step we take on first, and I'd say that we're going to make this little line here. We're going to carve along this, and it's going to come right its way, and I say that This is just where we're going to go now. With a little work and a little character, we can make this come out like it is supposed to be. We've kind of cut a little chunk out right in there, and we're going to work along on it. I tell you, I took my little test drive today out to the Jessamine County Fairgrounds in Nicholasville, and because I have a little show there this weekend, and I know one thing, the show is hosted by the Jessamine County Humane Society, and what I noticed is that the Humane Society Animal Shelter is right there next to the fairgrounds, so that was to my surprise, but I decided that since I was out there today, I'd just go into that shelter just to kind of look around, see what I could see, and it was a wonderful little place. You know, I'm old now, so I try not to loiter around places like I did when I was younger. I sometimes would go in. I went into that shelter today and learned a few things. They kind of have this little area they call a cat corner, where they have this little glass window there with a little corner inside of it where they keep all the cats. And then I sort of like saw a door with a sign with apparently some dogs behind it, and it said ear protection required for periods of longer than 15 minutes. So saw a man working in there. He had a badge embroidered and hemmed into his shirt, and I assumed he was some kind of an officer, but apparently he was probably some kind of an animal officer, because that's what he was there with. He was there with the animal shelter, and that's what it even said on his badge, that he was some kind of an officer, and it had something to do with the animals. So I asked him a little question about where it said that for periods of longer than 15 minutes, ear protection is required. I asked him why that was, and he said it's because of all the dogs barking in there. I could kind of get that impression, because it did seem like it was pretty noisy in there. It was just a small little room with little kennels, little fences, and dogs behind it. I'd probably seen dog shelters, maybe on cartoons and MTVs, but never really had seen one in person. Never been in one in person before, so I went in there. Sure enough, those dogs were noisy. They were barking. There was a little sign on the door also saying to sanitize your hands before and after petting any of the dogs. So I kind of took a little thing like that into account, decided to go ahead and do that, take care of that little business, and so we did that. And so I didn't pet any of the dogs because I didn't know any of them, didn't know that they were all so friendly, didn't know what they all would be like, so didn't know if any of them might be aggressive or anything, so I didn't put my hand towards the fence or touch any of them, but I just took a very quick walk through there and took a little look, and sure enough, yes, they were barking, they were noisy, but I came back out and asked the officer again some questions and told him that from what I understood about it, one question I asked was whether any of those dogs were aggressive. He said, not usually. So that kind of turned out to be a good thing to consider for the future. They'd probably put a sign on there to warn you if they were, maybe. And there was one little room I saw down the other hallway. Not only did it have that ear protection sign on it, but it said employees only. So when I saw that employees only sign, I said to him, "Sir," I said, "I'd be curious what that is, but really don't think it's any of my business." And he said, "Well, that's where we take all our stray dogs. That's where we take them so we can return them to their owners." So there was a lot to learn today about the shelters while I was down there. Just makes me think of some things I'm going to get on as I say a little more. But I tell you, when I was like around 15, 16, and 17 years old, there was a little pet store that was down the street from my home. I used to walk down there and loiter around that pet store a lot. Tell you, I mean, it's probably hard enough for a teenage kid to understand some things, but for one like me who was on the autism spectrum with an undiagnosed case, different way of brain of working, there were just a lot of things I couldn't understand, and think it's interesting to look back now and to think that there were employees in that store who would just let me loiter around. Sometimes I think looking back that it wasn't very wise and wasn't very respectful, but you know, there I used to sometimes not really think at that age I was all that noticeable, but I come to see that when you're in a place as often as I was there, like I was there every day, it does become a little more noticeable to people. I'd say of all things, they had little cats and dogs in the front of the store. If it hadn't been for a certain other man who was in there just hanging out himself, I would have never assumed you could just take the puppies and kittens out of their cages and hold them. That other man who was in there with me, he seemed to be a little handicapped too, kind of like I was. And if he was special needs himself, that might have been all the more reason why he did that. Probably being a special needs person myself, probably couldn't really understand myself that just because I saw somebody else do that didn't mean it was okay or appropriate. So I started going in there all the time and doing it. Sometimes I think looking back now, it's kind of a wonder they let me do that with the puppies and the kittens, but sometimes I couldn't tell a manager from an employee in those days. I couldn't tell an owner from a manager, but there's one lady who was there a lot, and looking back now, I sometimes seem to think she probably was the owner. And the reason I just say that is because I know that depending on who was there that day and depending on what not, sometimes I would take the ferrets out of their cages and hold them. Probably shouldn't have been doing that with any of the animals, but the thing of it is, she did tell me one day that she'd prefer I didn't fool with the ferrets. So, I mean, if anybody else was there that day, they'd let me do it, and if I had known how to take things into consideration, I probably would have never done it after she said it, whether she was there or not. But there had been another day when I was sort of like taking puppies and kittens out and around, and one day I reached into the cage just to pet the ferrets, and the lady said to me, "I already told you I don't want you holding those, and you've already held one today." Sure enough, that was the truth. Probably I'd say after she said that to me the second time, I don't think I ever messed with them again, no matter who might have been there. But I do know that they knew me. They knew who I was. They knew I was there all the time. Even my father would sometimes tell me in those days not to be loitering around there. He would advise me in that. Sometimes I just wouldn't always listen. I was just kind of a young kid who just thought it was fun to hang around in a pet store and treat it like a little zoo. Strange little things we learn in life. I will say this time around, I'm coming down to this. I took the gouge and made the little circle around the face here. And we're going to carve along that, kind of round off the circle, kind of make it so it has a good end. But I'll say, getting back to the pet store, a lot of things I couldn't consider back then. One day they had a little snake in the pet store, and just for one particular day they were taking it out of its cage and letting people hold it. They said they wouldn't be doing that all the time, but just for that day. But since they let me do it, I decided I'd take it into my hands, and while I was holding it, it defecated on the floor. So, I mean, I tell you, snakes will do that sometimes. I've had some as pets myself that I've kept in glass aquariums, and when I took them out to hold them in the bed and in the bedroom, they kind of do that. So I had to put them back in the cage for it. And as for how this particular little one was, you know, but I know of all things, whenever I would take those kittens and puppies out of their cages, there was one particular day when I took a puppy out of its cage to hold it, and that nice lady who had previously told me to leave the ferrets alone, she did ask me nicely that day if I could hold that puppy while she was cleaning its cage. I was so happy to do it, you know, keep it a little company, give it a little love in my arms. That was just something I enjoyed for the moment. But of all other things, I tell you, there was a little vet's office that was right next door to the pet store, and there was a lady, I don't know whether she was a pet nurse or a pet receptionist, or even if she was a veterinarian herself, but I do know she was there one day, and I took one kitten out of one cage and held it up to the outside of the other cage, and the kitten from in my hands and the kitten inside that other cage started kind of reaching out to each other with their paws, and she said, "Don't do that. I don't want those two kittens together." And that lady who was there as the worker in the vet shop next door, she said to me, "Yeah, you might want to put those kittens back where you put them." So there was just a lot of little interest to learn out there, and I'd say of all things, so much I learned from the places I'd been and things I'd done. Even in my 20s, there were other pet stores where I hung out in, and I'd say about those little places I go and what I do. I even bought a rabbit from that pet store one time as a teenager. It was not too many months before they went out of business and closed down, and there were just all different kinds of creatures I'd get out of there. Once, when I was a kid, I got a tree frog out of there. Once, when I was a kid, I got a newt out of there. And even when the pet store was at its older location in a different shopping center when I was much younger, I had even gotten a house gecko out of there. So that's just how these little creatures became my pets over the days. And I tell you, they were all just little good, little compliments to live by. I'll say in all things that there's been so much to learn in pet shops and animal shelters. I've done some volunteering in wildlife shelters before. I've kind of, did a little of that my senior year in high school in a place called Wolf Run that was out in Nicholasville, and they had these creatures there I was allowed to work with, and creatures there I wasn't allowed to work with. I'll show you how this came out. Finally did carve along on the inside of the blanket here to make the little swaddling clothes it lays in. So that's how that turned out. Sometimes I get to where I have so much to say that I forget to show you all the steps. Many more stories to tell to come, but I'd say of all things, there's been a little place I've been today, and I kind of got to see what the fairgrounds really looked like, find my directions there. Sometimes it gets a little troublesome to kind of find your ways to and back from places, but you kind of find it eventually, and sometimes you might find yourself on a different route, but eventually you find yourself back on the road you need to take to get back home. Saw a few places while I was out today, a few places where kind of missed being. Saw that Starbucks in Nicholasville in front of Kohl's in the Commerce Center, and I mean, I enjoyed going there for a time, but this is just a time when it was just good for me to get a break from there and get away from there for a while and to kind of focus on work and focus on business. So that's how I did with that. This video may be coming out a little bit longer than I expected, but I'd say it's going to be okay. There's a lot to say on this video, but here's what I'm showing you now. I gouged around the little head there to show you how this shall come out. And of all the things we hear these days, I say that, you know, so much I learn from the people I get around. Even at that Starbucks where I hung out, it was mostly girls hanging, always in there working at night, but there were a few guys who worked there during the daytime, one who worked as a shift supervisor during the day. Now I'm going to show you what I'm going to do next. I'm going to cut along this line right here. And there's going to be some lines all around making this rectangle I'm going to cut out. But I will tell you about that other fellow there. He had a little German Shepherd pup that he brought in. Some of the girls that worked there in the evenings, I mean, they loved dogs and loved puppies so much that they would really love his little German Shepherd pup when he brought it in. I'd kind of see it go on. I'd see it happen. And I mean, I tell you, you know, I've just gotten older and gotten to where I'm a little cautious with strangers more than I used to be. I'd say when I was a kid, I used to pet strangers' dogs, and I'd say even whenever I worked out at Whitaker Bank Ballpark for the Lexington Legends games for Airmark, the company that provided the concessions at the time, there were just little dogs out there we had on our Bark in the Park night, and you know, we had fans and employees both who brought in their dogs on those nights, and sometimes I would just love those dogs so much that I'd even walk up to the strange ones and pet them, paying no mind to the fact that I didn't know these dogs and didn't know whether they were friendly or not, and probably once or twice probably got growled at by one, almost got bit, but I ran so fast I made it. And, whoa, I tell you, you know, what I just regret so much, because there was actually a rule against running in the ballpark, like, whenever it came to those kids and stuff. Children often did it, and sometimes even when employees would do it, they'd kind of get called out. Now, of course, with me, I kind of tried to help out up there. If I saw kids doing it, I'd tell them to stop. But the only time I'd start running in the park was when one of those dogs started barking or growling at me, and I had to get out of its way. And I tell you, poor man who was there as a fan, ran into him one time while I was running from a dog that was barking. It was one that was half golden retriever and half poodle. I was petting him, and he was doing just fine, and he started to bark all of a sudden. I asked his owner if it was normal for him to do that, and then he said, I don't understand. He's never done that before. So I think that there were some of these dogs were probably the way they were because I carried around that cleaner with me and those rags, and probably had that cleaner on my hands from going around cleaning counters, and some of them were probably just a little bit bothered by the smell of the cleaner. That was probably the reason why some of them would kind of bark the way they would or growl like they would when they smelled that, probably. I know there was one lady out there who told me that her dog was kind of scared of all the mascots, the big guys in the big costumes like Big L and Little Pee Wee and them, who were all out there, and sometimes it could just be all the different things depending on what the dogs are used to and whatnot. I'd say as for now, finally got done with this part, and we are going to also try to do a little something else here. Some of these steps I kind of get them a little backwards, get them a little reverse, but I kind of do them in whatever order is most convenient for me. So I'd say we've already drawn these lines on the sides that kind of make out the angles for the crib. So one thing we kind of got to do here is to sort of like make a little line that goes about down the middle up to where the leg meets to the other side. Take it a little farther along, work it a little farther along, and that is where we're going to make the sides come out. So the first thing we kind of do when we get to that is we carve along the side of the leg and try to make it so it works its best way. I say that we've got a little work to come here. We got the leg here. We're going to do the other one as well. And there we got the little time when, yeah, we got that now. We're going to kind of make this other one here. Shouldn't be sawing with the knife. That's a bad habit. Sometimes I get into it though. That's one thing where Calvin Grant would say, "You're sawing, you're doing it all wrong." And once or twice there might have been a lady or two in that group who could just as well have said quite the same thing. So we're getting the work to come along on this. I say that we're going to take the same little step on this other little piece of crib as well. I know I like to look at my watch a lot. It's kind of a habit for me. People wonder why I do it, but I tell you, I always just get curious about the time when I get busy, so I always like to kind of know what I'm doing, know where I'm going, know where I'm taking things. So I'd say a little work like this. Tell you a little thing about my show this weekend out at the local Lex market. Some lady pointed to one of my little walnut carvings and asked me if that was a dog. I told her it was a mouse. She said, "Ooh, no, don't think I want one of those." I tell you, I've never sold a mouse, but out of the 4 I've made, I have 2 left, and there's only certain reasons why certain ones of them went. One show I went to, I had a young lady who kind of helped me out. It was a show where we didn't have a restroom right there on the grounds where we were, so if we had to use one, we had to walk down the street to the Walgreens to use theirs. So that was kind of the reason why she sort of took care of my booth and watched my booth for me while I went down there, and kind of, I'd say, just took care of that little thing. We got it taken care of, and I mean, she was so nice to watch over my booth that time that I decided I'd give her $5 credit off of anything she wanted, so she chose one of those little $5 mice. I was happy for her to have it. Just wanted to kind of show her a little grace and a little reward just for being helpful. And there was another show I went to where there was this little girl who was out there, and she wanted both my fox and my mouse that I was selling. The fox was $15 and the mouse was $5, so the lady, who might have been the girl's mother but looked old enough to be the girl's grandmother, said to her, I can't buy both. You'll have to choose one or the other. I decided to make a little deal with her. I said, if you buy the fox, I'll let you have the mouse. So that was the deal. That was how the other mouse went. And I've learned that that's another secret to trying to have good business is, try to give people deals now and then, Try to do little things like that just to kind of do people little favors now and then. It's kind of like the time when I was at that Episcopal church and it was Advent market. So now you see I've gotten the legs out on this other side. And one thing I'll tell you about that was that there was a little boy there. He wanted to buy something, but I heard his mother say that he gave all his money to offertory. I don't think any of the other vendors would have been able to do this, but I asked her how much he gave to offertory, so she told me how much he gave, and I told her I'd be willing to give him that much credit at my booth, because if he gave it to the offertory and I gave him that much credit, then I might as well have given it to offertory in his name. So I was just so proud of him for his little deed that I decided to show him a little grace, give him a little reward. And that's one of the things that I've learned. Like, businesses have deals and promotions and things, and we kind of try to do little special help for people. It's almost kind of like when I first started taking my animals to the taxidermist. I mean, back in the year 2000, I had a little pet ball python that died, and called the taxidermist, took him to him. He said it would cost $120, so I paid my $20 deposit and was willing to let the $100 wait until after he was done. But it took him a year to get around to it because of all the African lines he'd been getting that he needed to work on, so he felt bad for how long it took him to get around to doing the snakes, so he didn't charge me a balance. Basically, you could say it just cost me $20 to get it done. Unfortunately, I will tell you, even though some of those taxidermies of snakes and lizards and frogs and fish I took to him and got done, I still have that particular one. There came a time when the shop was being renovated and the vibrations of the room kind of knocked it off the shelf, and the little stuff that was used inside to stuff the mounting, it broke, and the skin broke too, so I had to throw it all away. But thankfully I still had my other creatures, and thankfully most of all still had a picture of that one. You can see now I have taken off the sides of the crib as well. So now we're going to go to this other one here. We're going to do the same thing to this one, and you will note that they even say in the end to kind of leave the sides of the crib uneven to indicate that they are hand hung. So that's just a little way to show what we do. I tell you, I think about this story and about Christmas and Jesus, and think about how It always makes me think about the reasons why Jesus came to earth, so we can enjoy heaven with him. And I'll say that I'm going to carve along these little lines here too. Try to kind of make it so it all comes out like a good little crib here. And finally, the work is all shown. The work shall all be done. One of these days, I'm going to learn how to do better videos in life. But as for right now, this might kind of be just for me, perhaps the best I could ever do. So, little work shall take us a long way and make little generous people out of us and make us all well worth what we're going to be, who we're going to be, what we're going to do. I say that this little work is just the thing that we see come out in life. I say that as for what we know here, I say that we got this, we got this, we got this. So I say that we're taking care of this little matter here, trying to get this out as even as it ought to be, even as it needs to be. So this knife might be getting a little dull, it might need a little sharpening, but here you can see finally came out with the crib. Now as you all can see, this video ended up being nearly 40 minutes long, so there was a lot to say, a lot to show, a lot to do, but like I'll say, just wanted to tell you that Sarah Listy of Tool Girls Garage posted a little Instagram today where she said, I feel accomplished. A little thing that came off of that show she's been co-hosting, Murder House Flip, and he always asks us, what do we feel so accomplished about? So somebody commented about their little bathroom DIY they did, and I commented kind of backing that lady up, just saying, well, for me, it's for all the things I've been carving lately and all the videos I've made about it. So I just wanted to share that little thought today and tell you all that I sometimes appreciate the things I get to come online and see and watch people do and be inspired by, and all the things I enjoy coming on here to tell. I don't have many followers, I don't have much of an audience, but I'm always blessed just to have a few and to even be able to just to share the little things that I see on the internet and hearing the little quotes I read. Hope one day that I might be able to make better videos and do a little better work, maybe be able to be a little bit better successful, bring about a better community and a better fan base, and have many more y'all to reach out to in life. So until then, I just want to say that you shall take care and be blessed. I hope you have a wonderful evening, as I'm going to just about end this video here and download it from my Amazon photos to my computer and from my computer to my YouTube. Take care and goodbye.